So I wrote a book. Yeah, that happened. Hey guys, I'm gonna talk about my book, I guess. So I would like to talk a bit about how it all started. And it started a long time ago, 13 years to be exact. I was in my final years of high school, I think. I just turned 17. I was still very much a teenager back then when I started writing my book, and the protagonists of my book are also teenagers, so yeah. And I had never written anything longer than a short story that was a few pages. And somehow, at some point, I decided to put my skills to the test and just write a novel. And when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I've read books, a lot of them. I knew what a book is. I knew it has a story, but how that story happens, how to make it happen, I really had no idea. So I just wrote one sentence, just a random sentence, and went from there with no plan. None of it was planned. The story just happened as I was writing. And I've made a lot of mistakes with it, because to me, writing 100 pages back then seemed like impossible. And I've never written anything long, so I had no concept of how to write long-term continuity, how to write plot, how to write character arcs. It was mostly just world building with me using the characters to explore the world that I've created. The world I myself was very interested in because it was all very new to me, and it was just a giant mess because it was just unnecessarily long paragraphs of nature descriptions and then going into detail about certain history of parts of the world and the characters just kind of getting lost in all that. And I wrote it to what should have been an end. And it was about 100 pages long. And by the time I have arrived at what should have been the ending, I had more questions than I had answers. Because while I have written something that was supposed to be a book, there was no real conclusion. There was no really anything to it. There were just random events that happened and random things that did not add up and things that contradicted other things, and it was just a mess. And I looked back at it and I was like, wow, this is terrible. This is absolute nonsense. I'm so embarrassed of this thing, and I'm going to put it away in a drawer and forget it existed. But my mind kept going back to it, and I was so embarrassed, so ashamed of myself that I did this thing. I was like, you know what? I never had plans on showing it to anyone, so I didn't show it to anyone. I just decided to restart the process and write something new from scratch, because I felt like, you know what? I feel like now that I've written this book, or something that's supposed to be a book but clearly isn't, because it just feels like a bunch of random stuff happening just because. And yeah. So now that I know how not to write a book, let me try to actually write a book. And that's what I did, and I spent some time writing the other thing. And then after that was done, which was incredibly easy, it almost like it wrote itself at some point, because with this book I took 3 years. Well, I was still doing other things like going to school, taking my exams. I was sick a lot, laying in bed and just unable to do anything. But it took me 3 years to write my first draft. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try again, restart, write a new book. And I did. And it only took me a year. And it was so easy looking back at it. It just came so naturally. It only took me a year. And it was so incredibly easy. And I was amazed. Because with my second book, it all started backwards. Instead of just randomly sticking my characters, I had an idea. I just closed my eyes and I could see the clear point where it all ends. That one point in time, the ending point, where it's all going to end. And I started writing it backwards, from the ending to the beginning. And it was, once I've kind of set up how everything is supposed to happen, knowing where it's all gonna end, it was incredibly easy to write it. So after that was done, I picked up my first book, looked at it, and now started taking it apart and looking at what was good, what wasn't. And eventually I fixed it, or my understanding of fixing it back then. But it was still not up to my liking. I expanded the story back then. So it took me, I think, a good 2 years. And what was supposed to be a self-containing story that was supposed to be one book became an entire fantasy series as the plot in my head evolved and expanded, and I figured out how to do things and how to connect certain dots, and I realized, wow, this is becoming bigger than just one book. This is definitely going to be a series, and I wrote fixed part 1, and then went on to write part 2, but writing part 2 was a completely different process from both previous writings. And it became an incredible experience where I had to learn how to do a lot of things. And it took me another, I think, 3 years to really, really both write it, fix it, and I'm probably still not done fixing it. And then I just kind of left it there. I started posting my drafts online, hoping I could get some reviews. Posting a few chapters here, a few chapters there. Didn't really get anywhere. And then I decided that it just wasn't good enough. So I didn't plan on doing anything with it, but again, my mind just kept coming back to it because it was my learning experience, this writing experience, from starting my first book to growing it, and now to just leave it to sit there. I wanted to continue the story, but at the same time I felt I could do better. I just need to learn more. I just need to figure out how to... Because the story I had in my mind, the story I had fully envisioned, when I was fixing my first book and writing the sequel, well, the draft of the sequel, I had so many concepts, so many ideas that I just couldn't accurately execute. And it felt like I want to do this thing. But every time I try to write it, it just comes out wrong. It just doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like it's supposed to be there. It doesn't fit with everything else. And I had no idea how to make it fit at the time. So I just took out all the parts I couldn't figure out how to fit. And I waited some time, wrote went back to writing short stories, went back to trying write some other books, experimenting with ideas and genres and learning. And then after a while, I went back, picked up this project again, looked at it with all the knowledge I gained, and then it all clicked. Like, I knew exactly how to do the things I wanted to do. At least do them well enough that hopefully they do fit. And I set out to fixing it for the third time, rewriting the same story for the third time, which honestly, 5 years from now, I'm probably gonna look back at the work I did and say, wow, this is crap, I could do so much better. But yeah, I spent 13 years writing a book, trying to polish and perfect it as much as I could, and I feel like I've done the best I could do at this point in time. And like I said, 5 years from now, I hope my skills will be better. And I'm probably gonna look back on this and say, wow, I could have done this so much differently. I could have done this so much better. But at this point, I really don't know how to do it better. And I've already spent 13 years on this thing, trying to get it right. I feel, and publishing it, I don't know. I never planned on publishing it. But that thought always kept nagging at me, and eventually I just did it. So yeah, I wrote and published a book. And it took me 13 years because there was a lot of self-doubt and wondering if it's really good enough and if I'm good enough to make this work. And it wasn't easy, but so many times I wanted to stop and just give up, and something inside me just said, no. We're gonna see this through. We spent 13 years on this. We're not gonna stop here. One step at a time, just slowly walking forward, seeing where the path takes us, and this is where it took me and my project. So, yeah, this is how my book came to be. I'm not going to claim that it's the best book ever written. There are definitely absolutely better things out there. But I write the kind of things that I love to read. At least I try to. I try to stay true to the things I love. Try to follow my heart in this matter. And write to the best of my abilities at the current point in time. The best that my skills allow me. And I want to keep growing as a person and as a writer. Learning to do things better. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna get better or not, but I hope I will. So my book, Gvera Cross, the Book of Beginnings. At first it was just Gvera Cross. Like I said, it was supposed to be a self-contained story within one book from start to finish. It was supposed to be very Lord of the Rings style because that was what I was reading at the time. I got really into reading Tolkien at that point in time. When I was in the hospital waiting for surgery, I was reading Lord of the Rings while I was recovering too, and yeah, that was my obsession at the time. So I tried to write a lot like Tolkien. Some parts of the book, I feel like it's going to be pretty obvious it was inspired by Lord of the Rings, but it it is not a clone of Lord of the Rings. I definitely try to avoid copying as much as I can stop myself from subconsciously doing something like that, because a lot of it is subconscious. A lot of it just sort of happens, and then you look back and look at it. Wow, this is straight out of this, or this is straight out of that. Then you kind of start looking for ways to make it something different, something original, convert it into something different, take it out, or something like that. So, Lord of the Rings was definitely a heavy inspiration on this work. But it has nothing to do with evil rings or hobbits or anything like that. So it has to do a lot with necromancers and undead and fantasy and magic and teenagers stuck in a ancient conflict and learning a lot of things about themselves and the world. It's in a lot of ways a coming of age story. So, yeah. I feel like the Book of Beginnings, because, well, that came on later, because this is not just the beginning of the story, but this is also a personal meaning. This is where it all began for me. This is where it truly began. My path as a writer started here with this project. And it's also the beginning of the series, the beginning of the story. So the Book of Beginnings is definitely symbolic. If it's not obvious already, Gvera is the main protagonist. There are other characters throughout the book that are kind of secondary main characters, and I don't want to reveal too much about the plot, but I try to make it simple, and then, like it usually does, it became something very long, very convoluted, very complicated. At least back then to me, it seemed very complicated. Now it seems pretty easy, but back then I was just amazed at how complicated this thing that should have been simple became. Yeah, there's, like I said, the story is gonna continue through multiple books. I am working on them, slowly chipping away. I don't know how long it's gonna take me, because I have other things I'm doing in life, not just sitting there and writing every day, because we still gotta work, we still gotta eat, we're humans. Everything costs money these days, so yeah. But I imagine within the next couple years, I'm gonna be publishing part 2, but could be 2, could be another 3 years, but I do plan on doing it eventually. I hope you do give part 1 a try. I had great, amazing, fun times writing it. It was an amazing experience for me as a writer. It taught me a lot of lessons. It was an amazing journey, both as a writer, as a person, and going back and rereading it multiple times. I sometimes would be surprised, because there would be moments I had forgotten that were coming, and even though I know the story because I wrote it, sometimes I would be amazed at, like, wow, this thing came out of my head. Really? Wow. Looking back at it, there would be moments where I would genuinely be amazed that I actually managed to take this thing that I was ready to throw in the trash like all my other projects and set it on fire and pretend it never happened. And I was very, very close to just destroying it completely. But I didn't give up. I took the time. I worked on it. I worked on myself, gaining new tools to do things better, new skills. And this is so far the end result. And I'm going to be as bold as to say that I'm just a teeny bit, just a little bit proud of myself for not giving up on this, for pushing myself and not stopping every single time I wanted to quit, because God knows it wasn't easy. God knows this was not an easy journey. Not all the steps were easy. Most of it wasn't easy, and most of it wasn't pleasant. I had to finish this, I had to go into some really dark places, personally, so I hope you do give it a try, and if you do, I hope you enjoy it. I really hope you enjoy it at least half as much as I enjoyed writing it, as I enjoyed working with it, and I hope you go on this journey and you have a great time, because that was my only intent on writing this book. Because I wanted to share this amazing experience with people. I wanted to give them something amazing. To write the kind of book that I loved reading, and all those amazing writers I used to read as a kid, and all these amazing stories. I wanted to give back an amazing experience to the world, this amazing, fantastical journey that takes you places you never knew before. And you come out of this journey a changed person, at least a little bit. So, yeah. I hope you give it a try, and I hope you enjoy it. The book is available on Lulu, lulu.com. Just type in Gvera Cross, Book of Beginnings. You should be able to find it there. And, yeah. I hope you enjoy it.